All right, hello. Welcome to the teleseminar, the webinar, Helping Others Without Harming Yourself. And as we begin, get my technology straight here. There we go. As we begin, I want to encourage you, if you are able to, take the action guide that was emailed out to you that will help you as you follow along and as you take notes. I also want to invite you to stay to the end. We're going to be about an hour 15 maybe, but please stay to the end because we're going to talk at the very end. I'm going to share what I would consider to be a game changer for me, a turning point insight for developing a way of living that I think is more sustainable, something that just helped me. So I know sometimes we can jump off these earlier, but I encourage you to stay to the end. So this is for you if some of these might be true. If you are in a position where you are in leadership, you're responsible for the well-being of other people in some way, whether that be spiritual leadership, in the church, or maybe even spiritual leadership that you're doing as a volunteer thing, or managing other people, teacher, counselor, therapist, coach. If you're providing care to other people, if you're providing leadership to other people, this is for you. And this is for you then if you're wondering if you're making the difference that you could be making. In other words, like there's more that could be happening in terms of the work that you're doing or the impact that you're having. Maybe you might feel overwhelmed or stressed out by the things that you're involved in. It seems like there's this two challenges people have. On the one hand, we can fall into the situation where we feel like we're not using our gifts and talents to our potential. So we feel sort of underutilized, but then on the other hand, sometimes we are in positions where there's so much going on, so many opportunities, and we feel overwhelmed by it. So try to find that sweet spot can be challenging. Number 4, this is for you if you're not seeing the results you'd like. You are working in some way, some capacity, whether, again, that be something that you're doing as a volunteer or something that you're doing as part of your career. And we will hit those times where it feels like it's not going the way we wanted it to go. And why is that? And so I hope that in this teleseminar, this webinar, that we can give you some ideas, some help about, excuse me, some help to maybe think about the impact that you're having in a different way. Number 5, this is for you if you're maybe not stressed out or not discouraged. You're in a good place, but you want to level up. You want to have an even bigger impact. And then finally, last but not least, this is for you if you are teetering on the edge of burnout. And one of the things that I know about this is I put that in, but I recognize that most people, when they're on the edge of burnout, probably don't realize it. They would not say, "Oh, I'm about to burn out here." What they would say is, "I feel really overwhelmed and stressed out," and of course think, "Well, that'll never happen to me," but it might. So this is for you if any of these things are true for you, and I hope that this is going to be helpful. In fact, I'm pretty confident that it will. So here's what we're going to cover. You see these are the main points of the outline that you've got. We're first going to talk about the challenge of helping others without harming yourself. And then we're going to talk about why it matters. I do want to say this as we begin. If you're on this, if you're watching this and hoping that you're going to get some brand new insight you've never heard before, I'm not sure that that's going to be the case. What I'm going to be doing here is sharing some things that we probably all know but need to be reminded of, and maybe you'll be challenged or invited to think of something in a different way. But the the problem that we so often have, and I struggle with this when I'm teaching or writing, is on the one hand, it feels like we're constantly on the search for new information, for different information, but the problem is not that we lack information. What we need is not some new insight. What we need is a way to be able to and be motivated to translate what we already know into tangible action. So I want to talk a little bit about why this matters so much. What happens if we don't pay attention to our own spiritual and emotional well-being. Then we're going to talk about the solution, which is primarily going to be about rhythms that we establish. And then finally, we're going to talk about building a life of deep impact and spiritual, emotional well-being. So that final point is going to be something that I'm beginning to do that you could be involved in. So I'm actually going to invite you to, if you want to learn more, if you want to continue to work with me, there's going to be an opportunity to talk about how to do that. So that's where we are. And then, of course, at the very end, I'm going to give you one final idea or insight. So who am I? I will probably be weaving in parts of my story in the talk itself, but my name is Mark Brower. I'm a pastor at Loop Church here in Chicago. I've been a pastor for about 25 years, and for 5 years I maintained my credentials as a pastor but was working in a recovery ministry. So I started 2 churches and was in pretty high intensity kind of ministry and went through a time of burnout and struggle in my own life, dealing with addiction. And again, I didn't realize it at the time, but it was really only after that experience that I realized how much of it had to do not just with addiction but with burnout. And so then I started working in recovery, helping others in recovery, got training to be a life and leadership coach, and started working a lot with Christian leaders, spiritual leaders, whether that be, doing it as their job, like pastors of churches, but also people who had other careers but were, let's say, heavily involved in their church, or even people who kind of had as a side business doing something that was, a deep, important purpose, like being involved in some sort of overseas work, or someone that I worked with was in an NGO, stuff like that. Kind of a variety of leadership settings, starting out talking about and focusing on their how to stay in a good place emotionally and spiritually to help them in their recovery. But then it expanded and just began to work with people, even if they weren't dealing with addiction, but just in leadership. How do I maintain my own well-being in the midst of giving out to others? So this has been something that I've been working with people, really literally hundreds of people, first off in recovery, and then I don't know if I'd say hundreds, maybe in small groups, in leadership coaching groups, helping them deal with the demands of a life where you're caring for others and trying to help others, and how to do that in a way that helps you stay in a better place. Well, in 2011, I decided to come back into church work, and so have been doing ministry and doing this coaching and writing and teaching and a little bit of consulting, but mostly coaching and mentoring on the side. So that's a little bit about me, and that's really what brings me to this topic here tonight. Is I've been working a lot on a book project and decided to hold off launching the book until I put something together that help people apply what we're talking about, or what I'm talking about in the book. I mentioned this earlier about this whole, the challenge of like more information, new information is one thing, but the real challenge, the struggle that we have is applying that. And I felt that about the, what I've been working on and doing and then writing about in this book is so much of the issue for us as leaders, helpers, caregivers, particularly today in the internet era. There's so much information out there. The problem is not information. It's not just like knowing what good leadership principles are. It's not just knowing about self-care. It's actually finding ways to do it. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm sharing information here in this webinar, but inviting people into a process where they can actually figure out ways to implement it. And again, we'll come back to that in a little bit. Well, going back to the outline now. So the challenge of self-care, the challenge of being in leadership or caring for, guiding other people, managing other people. We're doing things where we're giving out of ourselves, but to be able to do that in an ongoing way, in a sustainable way, and to do it in a healthy way, we give lip service to self-care. We give lip service to developing ourselves as well as giving out to others. But my observation is a lot of people struggle with this. And there's a variety of ways that we can get into trouble, that we can lose our way when we're investing ourselves in the service of other people. And there's 5 bullet points in your notes, and here's just a quick list, some observations that I've seen. One of the things to start off with would be maybe not what we would normally want to start out with, and that is just we get distracted from what's really important. So part of what I try to do with people is we talk about what is your sense of calling. What do you feel like God is calling you to do? And again, you might have a particular position, but within that position, there's various ways you can use your gifts and talents and time. What is the best way for you to use your gifts and talents to serve other people, to make a difference in the world? Well, that's great if we get clarity about that. It's great if we know that. But if you're like me, every day practically, you'll get emails, social media things that offer you ideas or invitations to help or serve in some other capacity. There's other things that our church should be doing. There's other things that I should be doing. Oh, here's this other thing that's going on that we need to pay attention to and worry about. And of course, with social media, there's all kinds of issues and challenges and struggles in the world. And what I find happening in my own life is it's really easy for me to lose sight of the focused mission that I'm here for, the best way that I can help other people, because there's all these other things that I get drawn to. So it's easy to lose our way where we get distracted. And we realize that we've given so much of our time and energy to things that while they're good, they're not the real contribution that we can make. Now, the next one is the more obvious one, that when we are giving of ourselves in service to other people, if we're not careful, if we're not deliberate about how we're doing that and how we're living, we can get weary, we can get resentful. The tank gets too low in our own emotional and spiritual well-being, and we get into a bad place, and that leads us to other things which we'll talk about in a little bit. The flip side of that is, we all have times where maybe we have things aren't going so well, but then we also have times where things are going well, when we're seeing changes, things are going good, and it can be tempting to get proud and smug about our own lives. And the other thing is when we're paying so much attention to the needs and challenges of other people, it can kind of feel like we're reaching down to help these poor people, and they're looking to us in a certain way, and then to feel like we're in a better place than we really are. In other words, to become blind to our own needs and vulnerabilities because we're so focused on others. The fourth is the way that we get into trouble is the work is often very busy and can be overwhelming, or there's things, particularly if we get especially attached to achieving certain results, we can get really anxious and stressed out. And then finally, we can get discouraged and disillusioned if it's not going the way we hoped. Again, if so much of who we are, our identity, our sense of worth is tied up in the results that we're achieving, or the level of affirmation we get, or the accolades we get, and if we're not getting what we're feeling like we want and need, we can be in real trouble. And so those are just some of the ways we can lose our way, and a lot of people do. Robert Clinton was a professor of leadership at Fuller Seminary. I think he's retired now. He wrote a few books about leadership from a spiritual perspective, Christian leadership. One of them, his kind of breakout book was called The Making of a Leader. And he's had an interesting approach. He was very, tried to be scientific, or at least analytical about leadership. So what he did is he went through the Bible and then through other parts of church history, and then also even in our contemporary life, and put them in a chart, the leaders who finished well and the leaders who didn't. And by not finishing well, what he meant, and he actually had, sort of a list of criteria, very analytical once again, but to finish well would mean that the leader at the end of his or her run of leadership was still productive, was still happy and engaged in life, as opposed to, obviously not finishing well might be a person, their ministry ends in scandal. But the other thing is that there might not be scandal, but their influence seems to have shrunk. Their joy and happiness and satisfaction has diminished. Anyway, so with that in mind, his research showed that the strong majority of spiritual leaders do not finish well. And in fact, his percentage was 70% do not finish well. And in other words, at the end of their run, their influence is diminished and their joy and happiness is diminished rather than remaining strong all the way through. And so what is it that will enable us to help others to give of ourselves, and to do that in a way that is sustainable and in such a way that does not diminish who we are, especially over time? So why is this so important? Why does it matter? Why should we be paying more attention to this than we are? So obviously none of us wants to give to other people to such a degree that we completely lose our way, we get totally burnt out, maybe we get physically ill, which sometimes happens. So that's one of the sort of obvious challenges, or the obvious consequences to avoid. But I want to say that I think about this differently. I want to suggest that you think about this differently, that if we are wanting to have an impact on other people, that impact is not simply flowing from the skills that we have or the knowledge that we have, the charisma that we might exude because of certain personality traits, That's part of how we can have an effect on other people. We have to work hard, we have to have skills, we have to have abilities, and we apply them in certain ways. But in terms of helping other people to have a better life, to provide what I call spiritual leadership in its broadest sense, where you're affecting people on a deep level, where you're supporting and helping people on a deep level, that gets integrally tied to who you are as a person. And maybe another way of saying this is to look at the other side of the coin, and that is, and we see this, that people's contributions, the great things that they do, the skills that they have, the message that they give, again, maybe awesome teachers, that can be undermined and even negated by lapses in their judgment, by aspects of their personality, their old nature, sinful nature comes out, and then what happens is that people, and we're going to talk about sort of how that happens in a little bit, but so often the great things that we are offering to people and providing for people get negated by these other aspects of our lives. Like the old saying, "Who you are shouts so loudly that I can't listen to what you are saying." So the goal of the work that I do, and I'm providing coaching to other people and mentoring, this program that I'm going to be talking about, and the goal in my own life is that the positive influence of your life would be multiplied over time rather than diminish over time. I think it was John Maxwell who once said that his goal was that the people that are closest to me would love me the most. That as people, and you might think of this over time, that as you're working with people over time, they get to know you more and more, so that the more that they know you, the more that they like and respect you, and that enhances your effect in their lives and the effect in the world, rather than as you're engaging with people, and the more they get to know you, the more they see things that disillusion them, the more they see things that turn them off, that cause them to not respect you and not want to pay attention to what you're doing or saying because of who you are. So what we want to have is, over time, an impact that multiplies rather than diminishes. And again, that's what we're working towards here. Proverbs 4:23 is a great passage with a reminder, above all else, guard your heart, for it is, one translation says, it is the wellspring of life. Another more modern translation says that from it flows everything in your life. So it comes out of who we are, and if we are not in a good place, then the help that we provide is going to be diminished. So what happens? What happens if someone is giving, serving, investing themselves in other people, but not taking care of their own well-being, and then they get stressed out, they get overwhelmed. Maybe certain temptations that wouldn't have been tempting before become temptations. And I've seen this. I've seen that people get overwhelmed, stressed out, they get depleted, and then they give in to some sort of outburst in relationships. They respond in ways that they would not respond if they were in a good emotional, spiritual place. And because of that outburst, causes them to lose significant credibility with certain people, or they drift into a feeling of entitlement, and there's a pride and arrogance that turns people off, or they become susceptible, we see this a lot, become susceptible to some kind of moral lapse, and then in the in the aftermath of that moral lapse, people who may have learned and benefited and been helped a lot by them, that all seems to get undermined then by this moral lapse that they have fallen into. Maybe even more subtly, if people are engaging in leadership, giving of themselves, and not caring for themselves, over time, their compassion starts to shrivel. Their perspective becomes narrower and narrower. The wisdom that is available to us when we are fresh and when we are in a state of intimacy or connection with God, like the scriptures, the Bible would talk about walking with God. When we're in that place, there's a wisdom that we have access to that gets diminished. We get less and less access to that. Our creativity begins to diminish. We become like this guy carrying around a can of gas. Now, this picture looks like someone is out of gas and walking to a gas station, but if you would imagine this guy walking around and all he's got, his only thing, is this can of gas. And so when he sees a problem, all he can do is put gas on it. So he comes over and there's a house and it's on fire. And it's like, okay, let me do something to help this fire. Well, all I've got is this gas. I'll pour this gas on the fire. Well, of course, that just makes it worse, right? Well, who would do that? Nobody would be dumb enough to do that. But that's the reality of how a lot of us in leadership go through our days and weeks. We are in a bad place, and we don't have anything. We don't have the resources to give to other people. In fact, instead of the peace and calm and joy and gentleness that come from the Holy Spirit, you think of the fruits of the Holy Spirit, God's Spirit in us. Instead of having access to that, that stuff gets diminished, and we are riled up, we are tense, we're stressed out. What we have is this combustible mix of anxiety and stress and maybe some other aspects of our old nature, our sinful nature. And so when we encounter something, the problem comes up, someone criticizes us, we're engaged, we get into some sort of conflict. Instead of being able to pour out these living waters that nourish and refresh, we toss out gasoline, which just makes the problem worse. All right, so if hopefully I've conveyed a little bit of the concern I have about the challenge if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not ministering out of a place of emotional and spiritual well-being. So if we say, okay, how do I do that? I want to do that. I have three things I want to say about this in this webinar tonight. And the first one is we've got to commit to it. We've got to commit to it. We've got to make this our top priority. Now, I was always taught that as a pastor and as a husband, a leader, that what we would do is we would put God first, and then we would put our family second, and then our work third, and then ourselves, last. So that if our time and energy and attention would go to those things, and that would be a way of serving other people, to make our priority be those other people and doing what we need to do for our own self, our own well-being. We put that on the back burner, and we get to it if we ever have time for it. And I actually want to suggest you do the opposite. Now, I'm not suggesting that we just, kick back and it becomes all about doing whatever we want to do for our own enjoyment. But I put it this way, that my number one responsibility is my own recovery and addiction, my own spiritual growth, and well-being. So the deal is, if those things are happening, then I'm going to be able to bring waters to the people around me rather than gasoline. And if those things aren't in place, then I'm going to have problems, and I'm going to make things worse. I'm not going to be able to, respond to the demands that are on me. So that's my number one responsibility. And the analogy would be, if you're on a plane and they have that safety speech that nobody listens to anymore, but they say, in the event of a loss of cabin pressure on this airplane, these masks will fall down. And then I always say this: if you're traveling with small children, put the mask on yourself first and then help the other person, because they know that there's a limited amount of time that a person has before they black out. And so if someone's fiddling around trying to help other people, they might black out and then not help that person or themselves. So it might seem selfish, but it's actually selfless in the sense that you're doing what you need to do for yourself so that you can be available to help other people. Who you are, your being, is your instrument, for better or for worse. And this is what makes spiritual leadership, spiritual care for other people, the kind of leadership and care and support that's wanting to influence people for their good, to influence people, maybe influence people in their recovery, influence people towards their own growth, influencing people in their spiritual life for their spiritual growth. That comes from who you are. Your heart, the attitude that you have, the energy that you bring, the compassion that you demonstrate, the wisdom that you provide, the love that you share, whether or not there's congruence between what you're presenting in terms of a message as opposed to how you're living yourself. Folks, these things cannot be faked. Or put it this way, they can't be faked for very long. Somehow, over time, it begins to unravel. So, commit. Let me just back up just a minute and show you this one to make this your top priority. What would that look like for you if you're going to make well-being be your top priority? What would that look like? What would you need to do that you're not doing? What would need to change? My sense is, even by stopping for a little bit, kind of catching a breath, stepping away a little bit from the responsibilities of our day, and we start to think about that, generally, when I work with people, I find that something comes up. Ideas come up. It's not like this is a great mystery to people, what needs to happen differently, but it's really a matter of, am I willing to do what I need to do to make it happen? So the second thing is commit to living with rhythm. And I sort of hinted at this earlier, hinted at it by the title of the outline, but this is one of the key elements, I believe, that is required to make our service sustainable, to make helping others work not only for them but for us. And that is, there needs to be a rhythm to it. And the word that I want to share that I actually got from someone else, Jim Lair, who I'm going to do a quote from in just a minute, is oscillation. That we oscillate between really fully engaging, giving of ourselves, working, giving out, and then interspersed with times of withdrawing, of renewing ourselves, of doing what we need to do to care for ourselves. And so what I invite you to do, or challenge you to do, is to look at your schedule, look at your life, look at your priorities, and to just think in terms of a lifestyle of oscillation, of honoring the rhythms in our days, rhythms in our weeks, rhythms in our years. This is Jim Lair talking about this. Well, maybe before I read the quote, let me just say this about Jim Lair. He got his start working with athletes, working with Olympic athletes and professional tennis players, and then he took some of the insights about what he would do to help them reach kind of their full capacity, and then kind of transitioned over writing stuff about business and leadership. And his primary principle is this principle of oscillation, that you alternate between full engagement and then stepping back to renew and recharge. So here's what he says, and I think his book, The Power of Full Engagement. Energy is the capacity to do work. Our most fundamental need as human beings is to spend and recover energy. Full engagement requires cultivating a dynamic balance between the expenditure of energy, which is another way of saying stress, the expenditure of energy, and the renewal of energy, which is recovery, in all its dimensions. We call this rhythmic wave oscillation, and it represents the fundamental pulse of life. So those two, stress and recovery, the giving out of energy and then the renewal of energy, and we pulse back and forth between those two. And once again, my observation is that many people who are in leadership, who are in positions of caregiving, responsibility to other people, this oscillation is not working the way it needs to work. We're not giving enough attention to stepping back and withdrawing and renewing ourselves. Living with rhythm is rare today. I'm going to share a quote in just a little bit to affirm this. It says it really well, but let me just say that our world is always on. There's always stuff to do, and we've got to make a specific decision to withdraw. And you see the bullet point there that it's not rewarded. I don't know many ministers. I'm just using that as an example because that's a field that I know, who get affirmed for how much vacation they take. In business settings, I know people have talked about how there's oftentimes unspoken pressure and even spoken pressure about the amount of hours someone should work, or to not take all your vacation time. It's hard to live with rhythm because there's always temptations to add something else or to do something else that's work-related when you're supposed to be renewing yourself. So again, we've got to be deliberate. And I would also say that it is essential. This is a quote from Wayne Mueller, who's written about the habit of Sabbath, which is taking a break once a week. And we're going to come back to that in just a little bit. But here's what he says about this pattern of work and rest, the pattern of Sabbath. When we live without listening to the timing of things, when we live and work in 24-hour shifts without rest, we are on wartime, mobilized for battle. Yes, we are strong and capable people. We can work without stopping, faster and faster. Electric lights making artificial day so that the whole machine can labor without ceasing. But remember, no living thing lives like this. There are greater rhythms seasons and hormonal cycles, sunsets and moonrises, and great movements of seas and stars. We are part of the creation story, subject to all its laws and rhythms. To surrender to the rhythms of the seasons and flowerings and dormancies is to savor the secret of life itself. Many scientists believe that we are hardwired like this, hardwired to live in rhythmic awareness, to be in and then step out, to be engrossed and then detached, to work and then to rest. It follows then that the commandment to remember the Sabbath in the Old Testament, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, this commandment to live or to remember the Sabbath is not a burdensome requirement from some law-giving deity, you ought, you better, you must, but rather a remembrance of a law that is firmly embedded in the fabric of nature. It's a reminder of how things really are, the rhythmic dance to which we unavoidably belong. So think in terms of rhythm. In your day, by taking some time to step back, connect with God, prayer, meditation, scripture intake. I have as a bullet point here, take daily smoke breaks, and smoke is in quotation marks. I have friends, I've never smoked myself, but I have friends who did and quit, and they talked about that one of the things that they missed when they quit was smoke breaks, that they would, every few times an hour, maybe once an hour, or maybe a couple times an hour, they would go down and step outside and have a smoke break, and maybe there'd be other people that would be on the break with them, and they would chat, and just how that helped them get through the day and by taking these little breaks. And so I was thinking about this and to suggest to people, why don't we take smoke breaks, but not smoke? Every little while, maybe every once an hour, every couple hours, whatever, step away from what you're doing and, just walk around. Maybe it's a time to step back and to think about what's happening, what do I need, offer a prayer about what's going on. Inserting that kind of rhythm would make a huge difference. I also talk about catch moments. Sometime just push your chair back, take a couple of deep breaths, and offer a silent prayer about whatever's going on. It's amazing how that shifts things. And then a transition ritual between when you work and when you come back home. I remember early in my ministry life, I would struggle because I'd come home and then I'd be spending time with family, but while I'm spending time with my family, I'm just thinking about work. And then when I'm at work, I'm thinking about stuff happening in my family. And there are things we can do to help that transition. If you have questions, you can email me about that. And we also will talk about this more in the Thriving Leader Blueprint program. Then rhythm in your week. Made that quote from Wayne Mueller about the Sabbath, that one day out of every 7 to take that time for renewal and spiritual retreat or spiritual renewal. In order to do that, there has to be other times throughout the week that we take care of other personal business. So we align ourselves so that we have that day where we can just chill. And again, I'm going to mention something about church work and pastors. There's a lot of pastors that I know that struggle with implementing a consistent Sabbath time because work seems to fill up. And then a structure or a rhythm in your year to take vacations, and not only vacations like to family or different tourist destinations, but something that would allow you to retreat and to get spiritual renewal. Americans have the smallest number of vacation days of any nation in the developed world. We get fewer vacation days than than any other developed nation in the world. And what's crazy is not only that, Americans, it's a surprising number of Americans that each year do not take all their vacation time because of stress or pressure or what have you, and we're paying for it in a lot of ways in terms of stress and health issues. It's really important to build this pattern into our lives. And even just, maybe a day away once in a while to just reflect and get some renewal. So I'm aware that it might seem like these things are sort of privileges that maybe you look at your own life and you feel like there's no way I could do that. I have this or that, the work that I do does not make this possible. I understand that we are all in different places in terms of the abilities we have to control our schedule, but I would simply just invite people to look hard at what they can control and to find ways of, to whatever degree you can, building in this kind of pattern, this kind of structure of engagement and rest, not just in your day and your week, but also in your year and in terms of how you plan your years. So that's a little bit about renewal through rhythm. But the third and final thing that I want to say in terms of how we can be helping others without harming ourselves, it's so important to have the right mindset. And I wrote, remember the difference between 2 and 4. And that in the work that we do for other people, we are responsible to them. We are not responsible for them. We're responsible to do things to help them. We're responsible to offer teaching and guidance. We're responsible, if we're managing someone, to help them with their objectives and to give feedback, etc., etc. But sometimes people make decisions on their own that we can't control. We're not responsible for everything that they do. As a spiritual leader, I'm responsible to the people in my church. I'm not responsible for what they do. And this is an interesting thing, even as a parent. Maybe in the early years, before children are developmentally, able to make decisions and stuff on their own, so we probably in the early years are responsible for them. But after a while, they make decisions on their own, and they're going to do things that we can't control. And it's super, super important for us to get clear about this. And for me, I'll just say the experience that I had in recovery has been super helpful. In recovery, there's a lot of emphasis on the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And for me, especially going through recovery in the midst of experiencing burnout and challenges in leadership, this idea, this awareness of the distinction between things that I'm responsible for making happen as opposed to people that I'm just responsible to, this distinction between things that I can't change versus the things that I can, has been life-changing for me. And what I realized as I look back in my own ministry is that so many of the things that I stressed about and got so worked up about were things that were things beyond my ability to control. I could influence them, but I couldn't control them. And sometimes I couldn't even influence them. And I notice this now as I coach other people. I think it's 80-20, and I'm not exaggerating, that if I sit down and work with someone who's dealing with stress, that the vast majority of what they're stressing about are things they can't control. And as a result of that, the more we spend time focusing in our energy and attention and worry about things that we can't control, like, for example, what other people are thinking or saying or doing, or what is going to happen in the future, what might happen, what other people might do, the more we spend focusing on that and worrying about that, the less time and energy we are investing in the handful of things that we specifically can control. And so it's a huge mindset shift that, again, I recognize as I put this out there, this is probably not a new piece of information to people, but it's something we need to be reminded of again and again and again. And it's something that I come back to again and again and again, is to remind myself of what I'm responsible, or what I can change and what I can't change. And then to really focus on the things that I can change, to really focus on what I'm responsible to do, and to recognize that other people are going to make choices that I can't control. Well, you can probably guess that living with rhythm is part of a mindset shift that's bigger than just these things we talked about. So as important and helpful as they are, and I think that they are, committing to our own well-being, committing to living with rhythm, and then continuing to clarify what we can and cannot control and focusing our attention on what we can control. If we do these things, we're going to be in a much, much better place. And at the same time, what I would say is there's more going on in our lives. And as I wrote the book about thriving leaders, and I kind of distilled that into a way of coaching and mentoring people through a process, I see it's part of this thing which I'm calling building a life of service on the right foundation, the foundation of mental or emotional and spiritual health. And so I created what I call the Thriving Leader Blueprint, and it's based on these 5 things. And we've been talking about one of them. We've been talking particularly about the 4th one, about creating rhythms and systems to make your mission sustainable. But there's more. And the first one is that we connect on a regular basis to what gives us meaning and what our purpose or mission is. There's a lot of books, and there's great stuff out there about helping you clarify what your mission is, and I talk about that a little bit. But what I'm most concerned about, what I'm most aware of, is the fact that, or the reality that we can identify what our mission is, but we tend to lose sight of it over time if we're not careful. And we need to have occasions where we're reminded of that, and where we come back to that, and we look again at how our life is going and what we're committing to in relation to what we believe is our primary mission. And so I think that's a super important part of this, is in working with people to help them continue to build a structure in where they're evaluating how their life is going and where their time is going. Next, to deal with the reality that it's rarely, if ever, just one thing, that we're continually having to navigate the tensions between the various things that we're doing. For example, a lot of people have a day job, and maybe they see that as part of the way that they're making a difference in the world, but then they also, on their off time, have this, maybe it's a side business, or maybe they're volunteering in some community thing or in their church. And so they're committed to make a difference in the world in this way, but yet they're balancing that commitment with this other one, and they feel like there's this tension. How do you live with that tension? And of course, the tension between the career that we have, or let's say the mission, the calling that we have, and then other relationships, our family life, our marriage. How do we live with those tensions? And I believe that many of us do not do that well, and that many people live with the ongoing sense of aggravation and guilt about how we deal with that, and so we have to find ways of adapting to that tension. The third is to tap into divine guidance and power, to have the sense of confidence that you're on the right path, and then to have the to recognize that the way that your life is impacting other people is through divine power working through you, through God's power in and through you. There's some important things to clarify about that, and in fact, I have something that is a bonus part of this program that is really helpful, I think, on this particular point. What can we do to build into our lives habits and patterns that allow us to sense a connection with how God is leading us? And that, I know, it raises all kinds of questions about, hearing from God and listening to God. But it's super important, I believe. The fourth is what we've been talking about, that we create in our lives, in the work that we do, various systems and rhythms to make this sustainable. And then finally, the fifth is, what do we do when we're going along with our work and it's not going the way we hoped? We're wondering if we're having any effect, or if the effect that we're having is really worth it. How do I deal with discouragement? How do I know, should I continue or should I do something else? So these 5 things, I think, work together to help us build a life of service that allows us to do our mission without being a martyr. So at this point, if you at your computer, I want to turn your attention to a URL. If you go to my website, lastingleaders.com/blueprint. There's not an external link to this, just you have to go to this directly. And that's going to take you to a description of the program, and I want to invite you to participate in this. So I'm going to shift gears now on the screen. You're going to actually see me going to this website right now. So it's lastingleaders.com and /blueprint. Now, at the top of the page, you'll see the 5 modules which we just talked about. So the Thriving Leader Blueprint is a program, a coaching program, an online with webinars and telephone calls, coaching calls. It's a way for me to work with people over a period of 2 to 3 months, and there's parts of it that are teaching, obviously, these modules, but then there's also coaching about how you implement those things. And so the outcomes that we are seeking to gain, if you were to be a part of this, this is what would happen. And I'll say this, I've gone through this program now with a group of people, and the feedback has been really, really encouraging. So that when I say we hope these things happen, these things do happen. You get clarity about the specific area or areas that you want to invest your life. And I would say the people in the program that went through, a few of them did some significant revising of what they felt like were their areas that they wanted to invest their lives. But most of them, it was like just clarifying it and then helping them recommit to it. Quit worrying about whether you're doing the right thing. Radically reduce your stress. Yeah, just one of the guys in the program, Paul, had talked about this, that huge shift in the stress that he experienced in his family and in his work through some of the changes in this program. You get more done without feeling that constant nagging about things that you are not doing. Be more present to family and friends. Sharon, one of the people in the program, talked about how it was really helpful for her to get some encouragement and a new handle on some of her family relationships. You'll discern how God's leading you. You'll grow in a sense of confidence about where your life is going. Stop worrying and wondering about whether you're on the right track. And again, some of us might be at those decision points where it's not going well and we wonder. You will get help in knowing what to do when something doesn't seem to be working. So here's the deal. The Thriving Leader program format is it's video teaching segments that you'll have access to. Each module, there's about a 45-minute, hour-long segment, maybe about an hour on average, teaching time about that concept. And then there'll be things for you to do, to work on. And then we'll have coaching time to talk about it. So the videos are taught by me. They'll include a notes page. They'll be available through audio as well. If you just want to listen to it in the car or whatever, you can do that. And then for each module, there's going to be a coaching session, where we'll talk about that module. Now, all of that stuff is going to be recorded, and you'll have access to listen to that. So sometimes people would not be able to be on the call, but they'd then be able to listen to it. And I'm also available through email, and you can set up one-on-one mentoring time if you'd like more. So the program is going to run starting now through Thanksgiving. So I'm recording this at the end of September, and so we're going to start in the next few days, and so we'll need you to respond quickly so we can get you in the program. So the investment for this program is $1,500, but I'm putting things together in a kind of a bunch with a discount for the people who are on this call. All right. So the first bonus is an audio program that was the basis, or that is the basis for the book that's coming out. And the title, there's 10 audios, Changing the World Without Wrecking Your Life. And that is for sale for $100, but it would be included in this program. The second bonus would be we're going to have a Thriving Leader Boot Camp in the spring. And if you're part of this program, you can come to that for free. It's a $300 investment. And the third bonus, which I added just for this program, I have a workbook. It's actually a journal you can buy online. But along with this journal, there is a teaching segment to help you through a 60-day immersion process in helping you develop a deeper sense of connection with God and to hear from God. Some experiments in that and some teaching about that. So that's included as well. So all these things together would be about $2,000. And what I am doing for the people on the list, I want to get as many people in this program as I can. And so if you invest in it now, it would be, you could do it for one payment of $597, or you could split it in 3 payments if that would be better. and you can just click on this link. This link, you know, where you see it on the screen, will take you to a shopping cart, and then you sign up, and then you'll start getting on the program. I think that's all that I'm going to say about this program. So come to this Lasting Leaders Blueprint, lastleaders.com/blueprint, and you can buy the program there by clicking on that link. And you need to do it in the next few days. We have, I think, about 6 or 7 people, and we're going to cap it around 12. And we're going to start soon, so yeah, you just have a few days. So I'm going to go back to the screen now with my outline, because I wanted to say one more thing. I said at the beginning, if you recall, I made a promise that I'm going to end by talking about something that's been kind of a turning point for me, helping to deal with the stress and kind of the sense of overwhelm that I felt. And I made a change, I don't know, this was about 3-4 months ago, and it's been a game changer for me, and I want to invite you to do this as well. And that is to up-level the quality of the input that you have right before you go to sleep and the first thing that you do when you wake up. So what happens for you before you go to bed at night? What do you do before going to sleep? A lot of people, it's reading something or maybe watching TV. Well, what if you were to be deliberate about reading something, certain reminders, maybe some kind of prayer time that you would have, something that you would say to before you go to bed that would allow you, that would put you in a good place before you go to sleep. And then the second thing is, in the morning when you wake up, what do you do? There was a study in the UK not long ago about what people do, about actually people's use of their smartphones. And they found that, I think it was 40% of the people said that they, first thing that they do when they wake up is they get their smartphone out and they start going through their email and social media while they're still in bed. And I just want to invite you to not do that. To not look at email, social media stuff, but something else that's like super important to you for, you know, spiritual reminders. Begin that time with a prayer. But if you were to up-level the quality of that input, and again, I'm not dictating what that input would be, but to think about what would be the most helpful thing for me to be reminded of, for me to start my day with. What would be the most helpful thing for me to think about or to focus on right before I go to sleep? And actually shift your routines to do that. And again, I believe that in a short amount of time, you will find, like I did, a noticeable difference. All right, so thank you very much for participating in this webinar and listening to this recording. And I hope that you will join me in the Thriving Leader Blueprint. The first time I went through was a great experience, and I hope to see a bunch of you in that as well. So thank you very much. Have a good night, and we'll be in touch.